You are 30 years old, and you feel like you are already late. Not anxious late, the way you feel when traffic makes you miss the first 10 minutes of something. Structurally late, like the movie started without you and everyone else already knows the plot. Your friends from college are buying houses or getting promoted or posting photos that make their lives look like something assembled on purpose. And you are standing in a kitchen that is not quite the kitchen you imagined, doing work that is not quite the work you planned for, wondering at what point exactly things diverged from the version you expected. Here is the thing nobody is saying out loud. That feeling, that specific, quiet, grinding sense of being behind, is not a signal that you failed. It is a signal that you were given a false map. You were handed a sequence. Degree, then job, then relationship, then house, then salary that compounds, then security. And you believed the sequence was the point. So when the sequence broke or slowed or never arrived on schedule, you did not just feel delayed. You felt like you were. That is the lie this book is going to dismantle, piece by piece. There is something true about being 30 that almost no one tells you at the moment you most need to hear it. The people who end up with fundamentally different lives by 35 are not the ones who started earlier. They are the ones who stopped measuring themselves against a timeline that was never built for how real change actually works. You are not behind. You are at the exact beginning of the only window that has ever produced lasting results for people who started exactly where you are standing right now. By the time this ends, you will not just believe that. You will see precisely why it is true. Chapter 1. 30 feels like everyone passed you. There is a story that has been told in every culture that has ever organized itself around time, not written down in any single place, not spoken by any one voice. It is passed through the invisible instructions that families give children before those children even know they are being taught. It goes like this. Life has a sequence. There is an order to things. Follow the order and you arrive. Miss the order and you fall behind. This story is ancient. It predates social media by centuries. It predates the corporate career ladder by generations. And right now, at this moment in your life, you are feeling the full weight of that story pressing down on you. You are 30, or close to it, or just past it. And somewhere deep in your chest, there is a quiet voice telling you that a window has closed. This chapter is for that voice, not to silence it, to show you where it actually came from. Here is what 30 feels like when the script has not gone according to plan. You scroll in the morning before you even get out of bed, not because you want to, because the phone is there and your hands move before your brain does. And what you see every single morning is evidence. A classmate just bought a house. Someone from your first job is announcing a promotion you did not know existed. A person you barely remember from college is posting photos of a vacation that costs more than your monthly rent. You put the phone down, you get up, you make coffee, and for the rest of the morning there is a low hum underneath everything you do, a frequency you cannot quite name but cannot quite ignore. That hum has a word, comparison, but that is too soft a word for what it actually does to you. Here is what it actually does. It takes your real life, the one you are genuinely living, the one with its specific complications and its hard-won moments and its quiet private progress, and it renders it invisible. Comparison does not just make you feel bad. It makes you feel like you do not exist, like your version of the story does not count because it does not match the template. Return to where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not the highlight version, not the story you tell at dinners, the actual morning, what you were worried about, what you were hoping for, what you told yourself was still possible. Sit with that for a moment. That version of you was doing something important, even if it did not look impressive from the outside. That version of you was gathering data about who you actually are. And the question this book is going to answer is what you are supposed to do with that data now. But before we get there, I need to name something that might be sitting in you right now. Something you have probably never said out loud. You are afraid the window has closed. Not a small fear, not a passing worry, a specific, cold, surprisingly detailed fear. It goes something like this. There was a window of time when you could have built the savings, started the business, bought the property, made the leap. And now that window is shut. The people who were going to make it have already started making it. The opportunities that were going to be available are already claimed. What is left for you now is something smaller, a consolation version of the life you originally imagined. That fear is not irrational. It is not a sign of weakness. It is the entirely predictable result of believing a story you were handed before you were old enough to question it. Her name was Dana. She was 31 years old, sitting in a parking lot outside a grocery store she had driven to and then could not make herself walk into. Not because she was having a crisis in any dramatic sense. She had done the math again that afternoon. She had added up what she had, subtracted what she owed, looked at what her peers seemed to have accumulated by this age, and the number at the bottom was wrong. Not wrong like a minor shortfall, wrong like a different story entirely. She sat in that car for 40 minutes. She did not cry. She just sat very still, the way people sit when they are trying to decide whether the life they are living is still the life they are supposed to be in. Eventually she walked into the store, bought what she needed, drove home, and told nobody. What Dana did not know, sitting in that parking lot, was that the math she was doing was built on a faulty formula. Not her arithmetic, the formula itself. The one that told her when results were supposed to arrive, and what it meant if they had not. What Dana thought was a measurement of her progress was actually a measurement of her adherence to a sequence that was invented for a different kind of life. There is an idea here, worth letting land before the next turn. The life sequence you were handed, school then work then advancement then house then family then retirement, was designed during an era when most people worked one job in one industry, for one company, for 40 years. It was designed for a world where your earning years peaked early and declined steadily, where the skills you learned at 22 were the skills you would use at 62, where the path was narrow because the options were narrow. That sequence was not designed for your life. It was not designed for a world where entire industries disappear and reappear in a decade, where a skill learned at 30 can compound for 35 years, where the knowledge you gain from your first decade of adult mistakes is actually the most valuable raw material you will ever possess. The linear life timeline is not a law of nature. It is an industrial-era artifact that outlived the era that created it. And yet you have been measuring yourself against it. Every morning, with the phone in your hand before you are even fully awake, you have been using a ruler designed for a different country to measure the distance you have traveled in your own. That is the tension at the center of your life right now. Not that you are actually behind, but that you have accepted, without examining it, a definition of behind that was never built with your specific life in mind. I know this because I felt it too. I felt it in the specific way that only someone who has done everything approximately right and still arrived at 30 with almost nothing can feel it. I had followed enough of the script to know what the script promised, and I had deviated enough from it to feel the full shame of that deviation. I knew what I was supposed to have by now. I knew the number in the account that was supposed to feel like security. I knew the title, the address, the relationship status that was supposed to signal arrival. And I had a version of some of those things that looked roughly correct from a distance but felt completely wrong up close. That gap between the surface and the interior, between what looked fine and what felt hollow, that gap was where everything important eventually happened. But I could not see that yet. At 30, I could only see the gap as evidence of failure. Further on, you are going to meet a claim about the relationship between age and financial momentum that clashes with the familiar story. When that becomes clear, it alters how you act every single week going forward. For now, the thing to hold is this. The closed window you are afraid of is not a window at all. Not yet. The fear that the window has closed is not data about your future. It is data about the story you are currently inside, and you cannot change your trajectory until you can see the story clearly enough to question it. 30 feels like everyone passed you because the timeline you were handed told you that 30 was a checkpoint, not a starting line. It told you that the people ahead of you at 30 would be ahead of you forever, that the distance between you and them was fixed. That compounding was something that happened to other people who had started correctly. Every one of those claims is wrong, not optimistically wrong, factually, demonstrably, mechanically wrong. The next 4 years of your life, lived with different information and a different set of decisions, can produce outcomes that look nothing like your current trajectory. That is not a promise made of air. It is a description of how time and effort and compounding actually work when they are applied to a life that has already gathered real data about itself. You have more raw material right now than you think you do. The question is whether you know what to do with it. And that question, the one about what the data of your first decade actually means and how to use it, is exactly where we are going next. Chapter 2. The map was wrong from the start. Here is something almost everyone in your position believes. They believe the problem with their financial life is timing, that they started too late, moved too slowly, or missed the exact window when money was supposed to arrive. Nearly every person who feels behind at 30 holds this belief with quiet certainty. It feels like a fact. It is not a fact. It is a map. And the map was drawn for a world that no longer exists. That is not a small distinction. That is the whole thing. You have been navigating with directions written in 1965, wondering why you keep ending up somewhere you did not intend to go. The reason nobody hands you a new map is not because they are hiding it. It is because most of the people giving advice followed the old one. They need to believe it still works. By the end of this chapter, you will see exactly where that map was built, why it fails the specific decade you are living in right now, and what the first real data of your 30s is actually telling you. Let us start at the beginning. There was a version of the standard plan that made complete sense. Graduate around 22, find a stable job, buy a house by your late 20s, work for the same employer or close to it for 30 years. Retire with a pension at 65. That sequence had internal logic. It was not stupid. It was designed for an economy where one employer could realistically promise a 30-year relationship, where houses appreciated at rates that matched wage growth, and where the distance between education and earning was short enough that debt did not accumulate mass in the gap. That economy ended somewhere between 1980 and 2008, depending on which element you are measuring. What replaced it was something fundamentally different, not worse in every way, but structurally different. Which means the old sequence no longer fits the new terrain. Here is where the first real data comes in. Picture where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not the version of yourself you plan to be, the actual version. What were you earning? What were you building? What did you believe about where money came from and how it moved? Now think about what the numbers actually showed. Not what the plan said they would show, what they showed. For most people listening to this, the first real data arrived sometime between 28 and 33. That is the moment when the gap between the map and the territory became too large to ignore. You could not keep blaming the gap on being young. The plan said you should have been somewhere specific by now. You were not there. The feeling that came with that was not just frustration. It was disorientation, because you had followed the instructions. Here is what the data actually says, and this is worth sitting with. The median net worth for Americans between the ages of 30 and 34 is roughly $28,000. Between 35 and 39, that number nearly triples, moving to approximately $76,000. That jump is not an accident. It does not happen because people suddenly work harder in their mid-30s. It happens because something shifts in how people relate to their own financial lives. The fog of following a script lifts. They start making decisions based on actual conditions instead of inherited expectations. That window between 30 and 35 is not a penalty phase. It is the diagnostic phase. And you are in it right now. Open this thought for a moment because it matters. If the map you were given was built for a different economy, then every deviation from that map is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of friction, the friction between a strategy and a reality that no longer match. The question is not what went wrong with you. The question is what went wrong with the map. Here is a man named Curtis who will help you see it clearly. Curtis graduated at 23 with a degree in marketing and immediately did everything right. He took the entry-level job at a mid-size firm. He saved a little each month. He planned to buy a house by 28, maybe 29. He worked diligently. He got decent raises, but by 31, he was still renting. His student loan balance had barely moved. 3 of his coworkers had been laid off in a restructuring that came without warning. The house felt further away than it had at 23, not closer. He started running numbers on weekends, alone at his kitchen table, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. He had not done anything wrong. He had done everything the map said. The map had been drawn for an economy where restructuring was rare, where one good job compounded into a career, where debt from education was small enough to absorb in a year or two. Curtis had followed a precise set of instructions into a landscape where those instructions no longer applied. What changed things for Curtis was not a new hustle or a lucky break. It was the moment he stopped auditing himself and started auditing the map. Once he saw that his strategy had been built on assumptions never tested against current conditions, he could finally make different decisions. Not out of panic, but out of clarity. He restructured his financial priorities around what his actual life looked like, not what the standard sequence said it should look like. Within 4 years, his net worth had moved from near zero to a position that could actually compound. That word is important. Compound. Here is the compounding piece because this is where the revelation lives. Compounding requires 2 things, a base and time. Most financial advice tells you to start compounding as early as possible, which is true in isolation. But what that advice does not say is that compounding on a small base in an unstable situation produces very little. The power of compounding does not arrive at the moment you begin. It arrives at the moment your base is stable enough for the growth to be meaningful. For many people born in the late 80s and early 90s, who entered the job market near or during the 2008 collapse, who carried education debt that previous generations did not carry in the same way, who rented in markets that behaved nothing like the markets their parents bought into, the stable base took longer to build. That is not a character flaw. That is math meeting history. The 5-year window you have right now, from wherever you are standing in your early 30s, is not the window you missed. It is the first window where your base is real enough for compounding to actually work. The old map said compounding should have started at 22. But 22 with $40,000 in debt and an entry-level salary is not a compounding position. It is a stabilization position. You were stabilizing. The map called it falling behind. Soon, you are going to meet a claim about momentum that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it alters how you act. But for now, hold this. The conventional life sequence was not designed with your well-being in mind. It was designed around institutional convenience. Employers needed workers at 22. Mortgage markets needed buyers at 28. Retirement systems needed 30-year contributors. The sequence served those institutions. It also served many of the people who followed it in the era it was built for. But it was never a law of nature. It was a policy dressed up as wisdom, passed down so many times that it started to feel permanent. When you internalize that, the weight of it changes. You are not behind some universal clock. You are misaligned with a script, and misalignment is fixable. The fixable part begins with something that comes before any strategy. It begins with understanding who you are in relation to where you actually are, not where the map said you would be, but where you genuinely stand. The first real data of your 30s is not a verdict. It is a baseline. Every measurable move you make from a real baseline is more powerful than a decade of motion from a position you only imagined yourself to be in. The map sent you somewhere specific. The data told you where you actually landed. And those two places being different is not your story of failure. It is your starting point. What does a person do when they finally know where they are? Chapter 3. Identity shifts first, strategy follows. They start by answering the question. They pull out a notebook or open a new tab and they make a plan. That sounds like exactly the right move. It is not. The plan is almost always the wrong starting place. Most people spend years learning this the hard way, cycling through new strategies, new systems, new routines, while the one thing that would have changed everything goes untouched. You have probably already felt this. You have started over before. Not once maybe, but a few times. And something kept not working, even when the plan itself was solid. That gap between a decent plan and an actual result is not a discipline problem. It is not a strategy problem. That gap is an identity problem. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Here is what actually happens first before a single result can change. There is a question sitting quietly underneath this chapter, planted in the last one. What does a person do when they finally know where they are? The answer most people reach for is action. Immediately, make the moves, fix the gap, catch up. But the answer that produces results is different. What a person does when they finally know where they are is decide who they are becoming. Not who they are right now, not who they were, who they are becoming. That single decision, made clearly, made seriously, is the mechanism that makes every strategy downstream actually work. Without it, every tactic you try is a coat of paint on a cracked wall. Priya worked in pharmaceutical sales for 4 years. She was good at it technically. Numbers were fine, but she felt like she was wearing a costume to work every day. Like someone had handed her a role and she had just kept performing it because no one told her she could leave. At 29, she quit. She decided she was going to become a UX designer. She bought the courses. She did the work. 6 months in, she had a small portfolio and was sending out applications. The rejections came. She assumed she needed better projects, so she built more. More rejections. She told herself she needed a different approach to her portfolio, so she rebuilt it from scratch. More applications, still nothing. A year passed. She stopped. Told herself design was not for her. Moved to consulting. Same story in a different industry, bursts of effort, walls, retreat. It was only when Priya sat down with a friend who asked her a single question that anything cracked open. The friend said, "When you walk into a room full of designers, what do you feel?" Priya answered without hesitating. She said, "Like I'm visiting." That word, visiting. She had built skills, made plans, changed strategies 3 separate times. But in her own mind, she was always a visitor in the rooms she wanted to live in permanently. The plan kept failing not because the plan was wrong. The plan kept failing because the person executing it still identified as someone who did not belong there. What is one room in your life where you still feel like a visitor? Think about it honestly. Not the room you want to enter someday. The room you are already trying to enter right now. Do you feel like a member of that room, or do you feel like someone who got in through a side door and is hoping no one notices? That feeling is data. It is telling you exactly where the identity gap is. And that gap, not the gap in your skills or your resume or your network, is the one that matters first. Here is the principle at the center of this chapter. It is not complicated. Every failed reinvention attempt fails at the identity layer, not the strategy layer. People do not fail because they chose the wrong career or the wrong business model or the wrong approach to saving money. They fail because they carry a self-story that is incompatible with the result they are reaching for. The strategy collapses under the weight of the story, and the story wins every time because the story is older, stronger, and more deeply wired than any plan you made last Tuesday. This is not a soft observation. This is a mechanical one. Think about how you actually behave on a day when you feel like a competent, serious person who belongs in a particular room. You respond to emails faster. You pitch yourself more directly. You do not over-apologize when asking for something. You make decisions without spiraling. Now think about how you behave on a day when the old story is running. The one where you are behind, where you missed your window, where other people your age have already pulled ahead and you are scrambling to catch up. Everything slows down. You second-guess the draft. You water down the ask. You hesitate on the send button. You do the same action in both cases, technically, but one produces a result and one does not. The difference is not the tactic. The difference is who is executing it. Now this is where the open loop that has been running since the start of this chapter finally closes. The answer to what a person does when they finally know where they are is this. They decide to become the person for whom the plan is obvious. Not a better version of the person who made all the previous failed attempts, an actually different person in terms of self-concept. This is not about pretending or performing confidence you do not feel. It is more precise than that. It is about making a decision so clearly and so completely that your behavior begins to reorganize around it before the results arrive. The results come second. The identity shift comes first. Always. Revisit where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not just where you were professionally or financially, but who you believed yourself to be. What did you think you were capable of? What did you assume about your ceiling? Most people find, when they look back 3 years honestly, that the things limiting them then were not external. They were not blocked by a lack of information or a lack of opportunity. They were blocked by a picture of themselves that was too small. And that picture, not the market conditions, not the economy, not the industry they were in, is what determined how far they moved. You have already lived through at least one version of an identity ceiling. You already know what it costs. Priya's story did not end at consulting. She came back to design, not because she got better at it while she was gone, though she had. She came back because she spent 3 months doing something different. She stopped adding to her portfolio. She stopped sending applications. She started going to meetups for working designers as if she were already one of them. She started talking about design the way practitioners talk about it, not the way aspirants talk about it. She started making decisions in her daily life with the aesthetic precision of someone who thinks that way at a cellular level. The results did not change what she believed. She changed what she believed, and then the results followed. Her next round of applications landed 3 interviews. She is now a senior designer at a mid-size product company. And she will tell you the only thing that changed between the failed attempt and the successful one was not the portfolio. It was who she understood herself to be when she sat down to build it. Later on, you are going to meet a claim about momentum, how it starts, where it comes from, and what actually has to happen before it builds that clashes with the familiar story. Once you grasp that turn, it alters which part of your day you protect most fiercely. But right now, stay here for a moment. The 5-year window you are standing in is not a deadline. It is a compound machine. And compound machines have a mechanism, a specific sequence of operations that must happen in the right order for the output to grow. If you put strategy before identity, you are running the machine backwards. You will produce effort. You will not produce compounding. The people who look back at their mid-30s and say that period changed everything are not the people who found a better plan than everyone else. They are the people who became, in their own minds, the kind of person for whom a particular life was simply normal, not aspirational. Normal. That reframe is the beginning of everything. You do not need a different strategy. You need a different answer to the question your behavior is asking you every single morning. And that question is, who is this person getting up today, and what is this kind of person likely to do next? The moment that answer changes is the moment the results become possible. The plan is not the door. You are the door. So who exactly are you deciding to be? Chapter 4. Your 30s are loaded with compounding fuel. Something is leaving your account right now, and it has nothing to do with money. Every morning you wake up in a version of your life that feels smaller than what you are capable of. Something precise and real is being spent. Not your motivation, not your potential, your time inside the window. The early 30s are not a holding pattern. They are a compounding environment. Every day you spend believing you are behind is a day you fail to deposit what you already carry. That cost is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is daily, and it accumulates exactly the way interest does, except in reverse, quietly draining rather than quietly building. The mechanism behind that drain is not your circumstances. It is a specific piece of wrong information you were given a long time ago. You have been acting on it ever since. By the time this chapter ends, you will see that mechanism clearly. And clarity, when it arrives, does not feel like relief. It feels like fuel. So who exactly are you deciding to be? That question was not there for style in any way. It was a foundation question. The answer you give determines everything about how you read what comes next. Here is what you need to understand before anything else. The assets that compound fastest in your early 30s are not financial. They are structural. They are made of knowledge, pattern recognition, earned relationships, and something rarer than any of those, a clear picture of what does not work for you. Most people have no name for these assets. They do not see them on a balance sheet, so they treat them as invisible. That invisibility is the entire problem. Here is the open question that will sit with you for a few minutes before this chapter answers it. If you were handed $40,000 tomorrow, would that money make you wealthy by 35? Or would it disappear into the same decisions that have always produced the same results? Hold that question. Think about Marcus. He is 22, recently graduated, and his aunt has given him a gift of $30,000 with one instruction: invest it wisely. Marcus is sharp. He reads articles. He opens a brokerage account. He puts $12,000 into 3 stocks he heard about from a podcast. He puts another $8,000 into a side business selling custom merchandise online because someone online said it was easy money. He keeps the rest in checking because he is not sure what to do with it yet. Within 14 months, the stocks have dropped significantly. The merchandise business required more time and money than projected, and after a difficult stretch, he closes it. He is not broken. He is not ruined. But the $30,000 is now $11,000. And more importantly, Marcus does not fully understand what happened or why. He does not yet know how he makes decisions under pressure. He does not know which of his instincts to trust. He does not know the difference between information that sounds compelling and information that has been tested against the real world. Marcus is not a failure. Marcus is early. Now think about Clara. She is 31. She has spent the last 9 years doing things that did not work out the way she planned. A career path she abandoned after 3 years. A business she tried and closed. 2 relationships that taught her things she did not want to learn but cannot unlearn. She has $4,000 saved. By most conventional measurements, Clara looks behind. But Clara knows something Marcus does not. She knows exactly how she behaves when money gets tight. She knows which type of people drain her energy and which ones multiply it. She knows the precise kind of work that makes her feel capable versus the kind that hollows her out by noon. She has what researchers who study decision-making call calibrated self-knowledge, a mental model of her own patterns that is accurate because it was built from real evidence, not theory. Clara puts 3,000 of her 4 into a specific, narrow skill she has been developing for 2 years, a skill with clear market demand. She spends the remaining 1,000 on one introduction, a person in her network who can connect her to 3 paying clients within 60 days. Within 18 months, Clara's income has doubled. The difference was not capital. Capital helped Marcus more than it helped Clara at the start. The difference was the quality of the decisions each of them made with what they had. And the quality of a decision is determined almost entirely by the accuracy of the decision-maker's self-knowledge. That is the compound asset most people in their early 30s do not realize they are sitting on. Here is what genuine compounding looks like when it operates on non-financial assets. You spend 3 years in a difficult job. You do not get the promotion. You feel like those 3 years were lost. They were not. What you actually built during those 3 years is a detailed internal map, the way large organizations make decisions, where resources flow, what language moves people to act, and what kinds of effort get noticed versus what kinds get swallowed. That map is not on your resume. No one is going to hand you money for it. But every business decision you make going forward is being filtered through that map, and the filter is quietly, invisibly improving the quality of every single choice. As this book keeps moving, you are going to meet a claim about starting over that clashes with the familiar story. When that point settles, it alters how you act. For now, understand this. The thing people call starting over is not a return to zero. It never was. Call up where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not abstractly. Specifically. What did you not know about yourself then that you know clearly now? What decisions would you make differently, not because you are smarter, but because you have actual data about how you function under real conditions? That gap between who you were 3 years ago and who you are right now is not empty space. It is compoundable material. Most people have never been taught to treat it that way. The linear life timeline told you something very specific. It told you that your 20s were for building and your 30s were for arriving. If you built well, you arrive on schedule. If you did not build the right things in the right order, you are late, and late carries a permanent penalty. That story is not just wrong. It is precisely backward for the way real compounding works. Real compounding rewards depth over time. A 22-year-old with money but no self-knowledge is placing bets without odds. A 31-year-old with self-knowledge and a small stake is placing informed bets. And the return on an informed bet is structurally higher than the return on an uninformed one, regardless of how much capital sits behind it. The early 30s are the first moment in most people's lives when the bet quality becomes genuinely high. Not because something magical happens at 30. Because by 30, if you have been paying any attention at all, you have enough real-world feedback to place bets that are actually calibrated. The 5-year window between 30 and 35 is not the last window, but it is the first window that combines enough self-knowledge to make good decisions with enough biological and social energy to execute them at pace. A 60-year-old may have deeper self-knowledge, but execution pace has changed. A 25-year-old has high execution pace, but their self-knowledge is still mostly theoretical. The early 30s are the first time in most lives when both of those variables are high simultaneously, and that combination is what makes the compounding in this window different from any other period you have lived through. Now go back to the question you were holding. If you were handed $40,000 tomorrow, would it make you wealthy by 35? Here is the honest answer, and it is not about you specifically. It is about the mechanism. The money would do exactly what your current decision quality allows it to do. No more. If your self-knowledge is high, your understanding of your own risk tolerance is accurate, and your network is built from real relationships rather than surface connections, then $40,000 in this 5-year window can genuinely become the foundation of something durable. If those things are not yet in place, $40,000 will most likely accelerate whatever patterns already exist in your decision-making, including the ones that have not served you. This is not a reason for despair. This is a reason for sequencing. The question is never how do you get more capital. The question is how do you become the kind of decision-maker who can multiply whatever capital arrives. And the early 30s are, for most people, the first moment in life when that question is answerable with real evidence rather than hope. Your skills compound. Every hour you spend developing a specific, marketable ability does not just produce 1 hour of output. It changes the quality of every future hour inside that domain. Your network compounds. One authentic relationship with someone who operates at a level above yours does not just produce one introduction. It changes the quality of the rooms you eventually stand in. Your self-knowledge compounds. One clear, honest accounting of how you behave under financial pressure does not just produce one better decision. It quietly improves every financial decision you make for the rest of your life. None of these are financial assets on a balance sheet. All of them are more powerful than money alone. And you are sitting on all three right now today, whether or not you have been treating them that way. The compounding has already begun. The only remaining question is whether you are going to direct it. What you decide to build in the next 5 years will not just change what you have. It will change who makes the decisions. Chapter 5. The Pivot Nobody Sees Coming Works. Doing less is often how you accomplish more. That sounds like advice a tired person gives themselves to feel better about slowing down. It is not. It is an observation about how a pivot with no visible effort frequently outperforms 3 years of aggressive lateral movement. If you have been working hard in the wrong direction, this chapter is going to feel like someone finally turned on a light in a room you have been navigating by memory. Here is the question nobody asks about a career pivot. Not which direction should you move, but what are you actually carrying when you move? Most people treat a pivot like a clean break. They picture themselves stepping off one path and onto another, leaving everything behind, starting fresh. That image is wrong. And the wrongness of it is exactly what has been costing people, maybe costing you, years of motion that goes nowhere. This is the open loop the whole chapter will answer. What do you bring when you pivot? And why does the answer to that question determine whether the pivot lifts you or just relocates your frustration? You built something over the last several years. Maybe you do not fully see it yet. Maybe the work felt ordinary, the results felt modest, and the industry felt like a ceiling rather than a foundation. But something was accumulating that entire time. Not titles, not salary history, something more durable than both. Remember Priya. You met her earlier in this book, 31 years old. A mid-level project coordinator at a pharmaceutical logistics company, 3 attempts behind her, each one ending in a version of the same place. She would identify a new direction, research it thoroughly, take a course, update her resume, and apply with genuine enthusiasm. Then she would watch the enthusiasm drain out slowly as the weeks became months, and the responses stayed polite but thin. The work she was willing to do was not the problem. Her direction was not really the problem either. The problem was that she was moving laterally, stepping from one version of the same identity to a slightly adjacent version, carrying her coordinator's frame into every new room she walked into. The 4th attempt was different, not because the industry was different, not because the opportunity was obviously better, because Priya was different first. She had spent 8 months not consuming new content or chasing a new certification. She was sitting with one specific question. In every role she had ever held, what was the thing she could do that other people in the room genuinely could not? Not what she was assigned to do. What she actually did that no one else seemed to notice needed doing until she had already done it. The answer surprised her. She could see the failure point before anyone else did. In pharmaceutical logistics, that meant she had been quietly saving projects from coordination disasters for 6 years. She knew how to read a supply chain timeline and locate the exact moment where 3 departments' assumptions about each other would collide. She had been doing this invisibly, calling it staying on top of things, getting mild appreciation and small raises. But the skill itself, the ability to read complex systems for hidden friction, That was not a coordinator skill. That was a risk architecture skill. And risk architecture lived in a completely different part of the market, a more senior part, a part that got paid 4 times what she was making. She did not pivot sideways into a different coordinator role in a sexier industry. She pivoted vertically. She repositioned everything she had accumulated, 6 years of domain knowledge, crisis instincts, cross-departmental pattern recognition, into a new context where that same knowledge was considered rare and expensive. Within 11 months, Priya was consulting independently at a day rate that exceeded her former monthly salary. Let that land for a second. She did not learn something new. She reclassified something old. The pivot nobody saw coming worked because it was not a reinvention from scratch. It was a vertical reposition. It placed existing depth into a context where the market had not yet priced it correctly. Bring to mind where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not in terms of where you wanted to be, but in terms of what you were actually doing day to day. What problems were you solving? What decisions were landing on your desk because, quietly, you were the person others came to when something got complicated? What did you handle that you never put on a resume because you did not have a name for it yet? Sit with that for a moment, because what you are trying to name right now, that thing you keep underselling, that is the asset. That is what you carry when you pivot. Most people do not pivot this way because the linear timeline myth will not let them. The myth says that you move forward along a single track, and any deviation is a setback, and a setback at 30 is more expensive than a setback at 22. So when people finally decide to move, they try to make the move look small. They describe it as leveraging transferable skills. They frame it as a natural next step. They minimize it to make it palatable to hiring managers, to family members, to the voice in their own head that keeps asking whether it is too late. The pivot ends up being small because the framing of it is small. Vertical repositioning requires the opposite. It requires you to say, out loud in rooms where people are deciding things, that what you have built is genuinely rare, that the context you have been placing it in has been the wrong size container. That is not arrogance. That is accurate accounting. Here is where most pivots die. It is worth naming precisely. The pivot dies at the point where you have done the internal work, where you have genuinely identified the skill, genuinely accepted the new identity, and then you walk back into the world and describe yourself in the old language because the new language feels presumptuous. You say coordinator when you mean risk architect. You say I have some experience with when you mean I have been doing this under the wrong title for 6 years. The internal shift happened. The external language did not catch up, and language is not cosmetic. When you describe yourself inaccurately to the market prices you based on your description, not your actual capability. The gap between your real value and what you are being paid for is almost always a language gap before it is anything else. Priya's 4th attempt succeeded specifically because she changed how she spoke before she changed where she applied. She stopped calling herself a coordinator. She stopped framing her experience as support function logistics. She started describing herself as someone who built risk visibility into operations that were running blind. She did not have a new credential. She had a new frame, and the frame was honest. It was the most accurate description of what she had actually been doing for 6 years. The external results followed the internal reframe. Not immediately, not without friction, but with a directness that none of her previous 3 attempts had produced. In a later section, you are going to meet a claim about momentum, specifically, about whether you build it before you change or whether it arrives after that clashes with the familiar story. After that really registers, it alters how you time your next move. For now, stay here. Stay with the mechanics of the pivot itself. A successful vertical reposition has 3 components. You need all 3 in the right order. The first is an honest audit of accumulated domain knowledge. Not the tasks you performed, but the judgment you developed. The difference between a task and a judgment is that tasks are listed in job descriptions. Judgments are not listed anywhere, because most organizations do not fully understand that they have been relying on yours. The second component is context identification. Where else is that judgment needed and underserved? This is not a question about industries you find interesting. It is a market question. Where is your specific kind of pattern recognition either rare or present only at a seniority level that currently excludes you because of credential gatekeeping rather than actual capability? That is the gap. That gap is your opening. The third component is the language bridge. How do you describe what you do in terms that the new context already uses? This is not translation. It is more precise than that. You are not converting one vocabulary into another. You are finding the exact words that already exist in the destination context and demonstrating that your experience maps precisely onto those words. When Priya said risk visibility instead of project coordination, she was not dressing herself up. She was stripping away a layer of imprecision that had been obscuring what was already there. Now close the loop. What do you bring when you pivot? You bring the accumulated judgment of every difficult situation you navigated quietly. You bring the pattern recognition that developed in your specific domain, because you spent years watching what breaks and why. You bring the credibility of someone who has seen the inside of a real system under real pressure. None of that disappears when you change direction. It does not even dilute, it repositions. The listener standing at 30 or 32 or 34, feeling like the ground shifted and they need to start over, you are not starting from zero. You are starting from depth. The question has never been whether you have enough. The question has always been whether you have been placing what you have into the right container. Priya did not start over. She stopped underselling. And the market, which is ruthless about many things, is oddly generous toward people who can finally name their price with precision and accuracy. Your version of this is not identical to hers. The domain is different. The judgment is shaped differently. The destination context will look nothing like pharmaceutical risk consulting. But the mechanics are the same. Audit the judgment. Find the gap. Build the language bridge. The pivot nobody sees coming is the one that was never lateral to begin with. And the question that will carry you into the next chapter is this. Once you know what you are carrying, how do you decide which room to carry it into? Chapter 6. Burning it down is a building technique. The room you are standing in right now is costing you something. Not rent, not utilities. The cost is more specific than that. Every day you spend inside a life structure that was built for someone you used to be or someone you were told to become is a day that structure pulls resources away from the version of you that could actually build something real. That cost is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply compounds quietly in the background, the way a slow leak in a foundation does. Invisible until the floor buckles. The mechanism driving that loss is not laziness or bad luck. It is a design problem. The life you are living may have been assembled with the wrong blueprints entirely. Which means before you can build anything that lasts, you may need to address the structure underneath. That is not a comfortable thing to say, but it is the most useful thing in this chapter. The question the last chapter left you with was this: once you know what you are carrying, how do you decide which room to carry it into? Here is the answer that took most people a long time to find. Sometimes there is no right room. Sometimes the building itself is the problem. There is a word that follows people who blow up their lives at 31, 32, 33. You have probably heard it said about someone you know. Maybe it has been said about you. The word is reckless, and it is the wrong word. It misidentifies the action. What looks reckless from the outside is often, from the inside, the first truly deliberate decision a person has made in years. The question this chapter is going to hold open is this: what is the actual difference between a breakdown and a demolition? Do not answer yet. Let that sit. The answer matters more than it seems, and it will not land correctly until you have seen what a real demolition looks like. Marcus had a good job. That phrase is worth pausing on because it is one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language. A good job, not a right job, not a meaningful job, not a job that was building toward anything he could name. Stable salary, reasonable hours, a manager who left him alone, a title that sounded respectable at dinner parties. Marcus had held that job for 6 years by the time he was 32. In those 6 years, he had also held a lease on an apartment in a city he moved to for someone else, a relationship that had ended but left behind a whole social structure he was still maintaining out of inertia, and a set of weekend habits that were essentially just recovery from a week he had not chosen. He was not miserable. That was the trap. He was comfortable enough that quitting felt irresponsible, and uncomfortable enough that staying felt like slow erosion. He left anyway, not impulsively. He spent 4 months mapping what he actually wanted before he handed in his resignation. He ended the long-term friendship group that had been held together mostly by shared proximity and shared complaints. He gave notice on the apartment. He moved to a city where he knew almost no one, took a contract role that paid less, and spent 8 months feeling like he had made a catastrophic mistake. His family used that word, reckless. His former colleagues posted life updates that made his silence feel like failure. By 35, Marcus had built a consulting practice that billed more in 1 quarter than his old salary covered in a year. He had a close group of 4 people who knew him as he actually was, not as he had been. He slept without the background hum of dread he had grown so accustomed to he had stopped noticing it. He did not feel like he had recovered from a breakdown. He felt like he had executed a plan. Here is the beat that matters. After you hear a story like Marcus's, the first thing the mind wants to do is audit the risk. Was he single? Did he have savings? Did he have the right skill set? All of those are fair questions, and none of them are the real question. The real question is, what did he know about himself before he moved that made the move possible? The answer is that he had spent 4 months identifying with specificity what he was building toward, not a vague better life, a specific one. He had done the identity work before the strategy work, and that sequence is everything. Go back to where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory, not the circumstances, the internal state. What did you believe was possible for you? What did you think the next 5 years were going to look like? Here is the sharper question. How much of what you believed then was actually yours, and how much of it was inherited from the expectations that surrounded you? 3 years is not a long time, but it is long enough that the person you were then made decisions you are still living inside right now. Some of those decisions fit. Some of them are the equivalent of a structural wall that should have been a window. This is the mechanism nobody explains clearly enough. There are 2 kinds of life deconstruction. One happens to you. the other you choose. When it happens to you, the pieces land in random order. You spend your energy trying to reassemble something recognizable. When you choose it, you control the sequence. You decide which wall comes down first. You decide what stays standing. You decide what the cleared ground is being prepared for. The external result can look identical to a breakdown, but the internal experience is fundamentally different. It is oriented towards something, rather than simply away from something painful. The lives that changed most completely between 30 and 35 almost always included a moment of controlled demolition before 32. Not always dramatic. Sometimes it was a resignation letter. Sometimes it was a single conversation that ended a dynamic that had been quietly suffocating them for years. Sometimes it was moving. Sometimes it was stopping the performance of a version of themselves that had never been real. But in almost every case, the transformation that became visible by 35 was rooted in a structural decision made years earlier, in a moment that looked, from the outside, like giving up. Giving up and clearing ground are not the same action. They feel similar in the body for a while. Both involve loss. Both involve the discomfort of empty space. But one is terminal and one is preparatory. The difference is what you are oriented toward when the dust settles. Here is where that open question lands. The difference between a breakdown and a demolition is not the size of the destruction. It is not the speed. It is not even the pain level, because a demolition can be agonizing. The difference is intention and sequence. A breakdown is reactive. A demolition is architectural. A breakdown tears down without a blueprint. A demolition tears down precisely because you have a blueprint, and the existing structure cannot support what you are trying to build. Before long, you are going to meet a claim about the right time to start over that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it alters how you calculate the cost of waiting. But right now, the thing to understand is this. You have been told, in ways both direct and invisible, that a life in good structural order is one where nothing falls down, where every choice connects cleanly to the last one, where the path is linear, the progress is visible, and the deviations are short. That story is not just inaccurate. It is actively expensive. It teaches you to preserve a structure at the cost of the life it was supposed to hold. It teaches you to maintain the shape of a plan instead of interrogating whether the plan was ever right. It teaches you that demolition is failure, when demolition is sometimes the most skilled and courageous form of construction available to you. There is a reason the buildings that last the longest are not the ones that were never touched again after their first construction. They are the ones whose owners were willing to tear out what was not working, rebuild the load-bearing systems, and then build upward from a foundation that could actually carry the weight. Your life is not different from this in any meaningful way. The identity work has to come before the strategy work. Always. You cannot plan an effective path to a destination if you do not know who is making the trip. And sometimes, discovering who is making the trip requires dismantling the version of you that was assembled by other people's blueprints. That dismantling is not comfortable. It is not photogenic. It will not get admiring comments in the months when you are standing in cleared ground with nothing visible yet. But it is the work, the real work. The kind that makes the next 5 years compound in your direction instead of against you. The 5-year window is real, and it is not closed, but you cannot fill it with a structure that was built for someone else's life. The ground has to be yours before the building can be yours. So here is the question you are going to carry into the next chapter. Not what should you build. That comes later. First, What in your current structure is load-bearing, and what has just been standing there because no one has been willing to take it down? Chapter 7. The 5-year plan that actually compounds. Saving less money is sometimes how you end up with more of it. That sounds like the kind of advice someone gives you right before they take yours. It is not. It is what happens when you watch person after person drain their energy chasing numeric targets they chose before they understood who they were trying to become. And then you watch someone else, someone who thought about identity first and numbers second, arrive somewhere real. The question this chapter answers is not how much you should save or earn or invest over the next 5 years. The question is, who are you planning to be when those 5 years are over? Does your current plan actually produce that person? Or does it just produce a version of you who hit some numbers and still feels behind? There is a difference, a significant one, and once you can see it, a checklist of goals starts to look like a very expensive way to stay confused. You carried a question out of the last chapter. What in your current structure is load-bearing, and what has just been standing there because no one has been willing to take it down? That question was about subtraction. This chapter is about what you build after you have been honest about what you are actually working with. Here is where most 5-year plans fail. Not in the ambition, not even in the execution. They fail in the first column, the one that never gets written down, the old identity belief. The thing you quietly believe about yourself that your goals were designed around, usually without your awareness. You did not choose it deliberately. You absorbed it. From a family that talked about money in a specific way, from a school that sorted you into tracks early, from a decade of small moments that told you what kind of person you were. And then, at some point, you started planning for your future using that belief as the foundation. The plan looked forward. The identity was looking backward. This is the cost no one talks about, not the cost of a bad investment or a year of low income. The cost of compounding in the wrong direction, building speed and discipline and habit toward a destination that belongs to someone you decided to be 10 years ago, in a season that no longer exists. Remember where things really stood in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Not what you owned or earned. Think about who you believed you were, what you thought you were capable of, what ceiling you assumed was yours. Now think about how much of your current plan, the one sitting in your head or in a notes app somewhere, how much of it was built by that version of you. Because that version had limits you no longer need to keep. That is the mirror moment. Sit with it for a second. The plan you are executing right now, whose beliefs built it. Here is the open loop this chapter is going to answer, and you will feel it close when you reach the end. The question is, what is the actual mechanism of compounding, and why does it apply to identity as powerfully as it applies to money? Hold that. It matters more than it sounds. There is a man named Darius. He was 31, living in a city he had moved to for a job that had since restructured him into a title that meant very little and paid accordingly. He had a spreadsheet 5 years out, meticulous. Save this amount each quarter. Hit this income by year 3. Own property by year 5. He ran the numbers every Sunday and felt a specific kind of dread. Not because the numbers were wrong, because they never changed who he woke up as on Monday morning. He was executing a plan designed for a man who wanted security above everything else. But Darius, the actual Darius, the one at 31 who had just spent a year watching what he thought was his career dissolve, that Darius wanted something different. He wanted to build something he could point to, not manage, not maintain, build. His spreadsheet had no column for that, so every gain he made felt like it was landing in someone else's account. He doubled his savings rate 1 year. He felt nothing. He got a raise, It registered for about a day. The numbers were compounding. He was not. What changed for Darius was not a new strategy. It was a single conversation with someone who asked him one question. If the financial result at year 5 were guaranteed, what would you want to be true about how you spent the 5 years getting there? He sat with that question for 2 weeks. When he came back to his spreadsheet, he deleted 3 of the 5 columns and replaced them with something he had never tracked before. The 3-column framework is this. Column 1, the old identity belief. Column 2, the transition behavior. Column 3, the new identity marker. That is it. That is the whole mechanism. Let's walk through what each one means. The old identity belief is the story you have been operating from. It is not a goal. It is not a fear exactly. It is the quiet assumption underneath both. Things like, I am not the kind of person who earns past a certain point, or I came from a family that stayed in one lane and branching out is reckless, or I missed the window when people like me were supposed to get started. These beliefs do not announce themselves. They just shape every decision from below, the way bedrock shapes a river without ever being seen. The transition behavior is not a goal either. It is a small, specific, repeatable action that belongs to the identity you are moving toward, not the one you are moving away from. The difference matters. A goal says, I will earn $60,000 more in year 2. A transition behavior says, every week I do one thing that a person who builds for themselves does, not a person who only works for someone else. It can be small. It is supposed to be small, because small and repeatable is how compounding actually works, not large and occasional. The new identity marker is the statement you are rehearsing until it becomes simply true, not an affirmation, not a daily mantra you whisper into a mirror. A marker is a concrete, observable characteristic of a person you are in the process of becoming. It sounds like this. I am someone who has one income stream that I built from scratch. I am someone who understands my own financial statements. I am someone who has put money to work in something I chose deliberately. These are not aspirations. They are descriptions of actions you have already taken or are in the process of taking. The marker makes the action legible to you. It tells you what column it goes in. Here is what Darius found. When he ran those 3 columns honestly, the old identity belief column was the most uncomfortable to write. Not because he had to think hard, because the first 3 items came out in about 90 seconds and they were blunt. He wrote things he had never said out loud. That discomfort was not a problem. It was data. His transition behavior column started sparse, 1 item per week. Eventually it filled. Not because he was disciplined in some heroic way, but because the behavior started attaching to the marker, and the marker started attaching to who he was becoming. That person was more interesting to be than the one running the Sunday spreadsheet for no one. By year 3, his income had grown, but that was not the compound. The compound was that his decisions had started coming from a different place. He was not asking, is this safe, which is what the old identity asked. He was asking, is this mine, which is what the new one asked. That shift in the question changed the quality of every answer. Now here is the thing about year 5 that most plans ignore completely. The version of you at year 5 is not a wealthier version of the person you are today. It is a person shaped by 5 years of repeated decisions made from a specific set of beliefs. If the beliefs are old, the decisions are old. The compounding is invisible, or worse, working against you. If the beliefs are updated, the decisions are different, the data accumulates differently, and year 5 is a fundamentally different human being standing in a fundamentally different position. That is the resolution of the open loop. The mechanism of compounding in money is time plus rate plus consistency. The mechanism of compounding in identity is time plus repeated decision plus accumulated evidence that you are who you say you are. The two compound together. They always have. The reason most 5-year financial plans disappoint is that only one of the two is being tracked. Down the line in this book, you are going to meet a claim about the right moment to take a financial risk that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it alters when and how you act. But for now, think about the version of you at year 5, not the net worth number, the person. What does that person believe about themselves that you do not yet believe today? What decision do they make with ease that currently costs you significant hesitation? What room do they walk into with a specific kind of quiet confidence? Can you describe that person in concrete terms? Because if you cannot describe them, your plan has no destination. It just has coordinates. Darius could describe his year 5 self. He had written it down, 2 paragraphs, specific, present tense. Not a fantasy. A composite built from the transition behaviors he was already practicing and the markers he was already earning. He read it twice a year and updated it when the evidence changed. By year 4, large sections of it were already true, not because he had willed them into existence, but because a plan built around identity compounds in places you are not even watching. A goal checklist measures distance from a destination. An identity anchor measures alignment with who you are becoming. One of those two things changes your behavior every single day. The other one just tells you how far you still have to go. So carry this into the next chapter. If your plan today is a list of things you want to have, when did you last update the list of things you want to be true about yourself? And are those two lists even written by the same person? Chapter 8. Everyone who helped you will resist you. Something is quietly being removed from your life right now. It has nothing to do with money. Every day you spend becoming someone new, reading differently, thinking differently, wanting differently, is a day the people closest to you are quietly, unconsciously building a case against it. Not because they are cruel, not because they want you to fail, because the version of you they love is the version they already know. And that version is slipping. They can feel it. The tension has already started. You may have felt it at dinner, or in the pause before your mother answered your last phone call, or in the way your old friend changed the subject when you mentioned what you were working toward. That resistance is not random. It has a mechanism. Until you name the mechanism, it will cost you more than you realize. The cost is not just comfort. It is momentum. At exactly the moment momentum matters most. This chapter is about that mechanism and what to do with it. A question came out of the last chapter and it did not settle itself worth sitting with. If your plan is a list of things you want to have, when did you last update the list of things you want to be true about yourself? Here is what no one warned you about when you started updating that second list. The people who watched you write the first one will not celebrate the revision. Not right away. Maybe not for a long time. Understanding why is the difference between surviving this season and getting pulled back into a version of yourself that stopped fitting years ago. This section starts with an unanswered question from the first minute. Why do the people who genuinely love you become, at exactly the wrong moment, the loudest voices for staying the same? Hold that. The answer is coming. But first you need to meet Jordan. Jordan was 32 when he decided to leave the logistics company where he had worked for 6 years. Not impulsively. He had spent 8 months reading, studying the field he wanted to enter, taking one online course at a time on Saturday mornings before his wife and daughter woke up. He had a plan, a real one, with numbers and a timeline and a contingency buffer of 4 months of savings. He was ready. He announced it at his parents' house on a Sunday afternoon, expecting not a parade exactly, but something close to recognition. His father set down his fork. His mother asked if he had talked to his manager about a raise instead. His brother, who had always been the louder of the two, said the thing that hit hardest. "You've got a good thing. Why are you always trying to blow it up?" Jordan did not leave that day with more confidence. He left with less. He postponed the resignation for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, he almost talked himself out of the entire plan. He didn't quit because of his own doubt. He almost quit because of borrowed doubt. Think about that for a moment. He had spent 8 months building certainty. A single Sunday afternoon nearly dismantled it, not because new evidence arrived, but because the people he trusted most had not been on the journey with him. They only saw the destination, and the destination looked reckless from where they were standing. Jordan tried again 3 months later. He shared the plan differently that time, not as an announcement, but as an update on something already in progress. He got a warmer response, not full support, but warmer, and he moved forward. Then something stranger happened. As his new career started to produce results, small ones at first, a freelance contract, a LinkedIn recommendation from someone in the new field, a small pay bump at month 7, the resistance did not disappear. It shifted. His mother started sending him articles about the instability of freelance work. His brother made jokes at family gatherings about Jordan's little business. His closest friend from the old job, someone he had eaten lunch with almost every day for 4 years, stopped returning texts at the same speed. Not completely, just slower, just enough. Jordan could not figure out what he had done wrong. He had not done anything wrong. That is the thing you need to understand. What he was experiencing was not a punishment for bad behavior. It was a predictable, almost mechanical response to identity change in a social system. Here is how it works. Every relationship you have is built on a version of you, a fixed image. Your family built their image of you over decades. Your friends built theirs over years. That image is not just how they see you, it is part of how they understand themselves. Your stability is their stability. Your predictability gives them a reference point. When you start changing, visibly, meaningfully changing, you do not just disrupt your own life. You disrupt the relational architecture that everyone around you has been using, often without knowing it, to feel settled. This is not malice. It is not even selfishness in the conscious sense. It is biology dressed as love. The mind resists pattern disruption. And you, becoming new, are pattern disruption walking through their front door. Look back at the shape of your life in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory. Who were you spending most of your time with? What did those people expect from you? What did they worry about? What did they celebrate? Now think about who you are becoming. If you set those 2 images side by side, the you from 3 years ago and the you are building toward, would the people from 3 years ago recognize the second one? And if they didn't, would their discomfort with the gap be a problem with you or a problem with the gap? The gap is not a flaw in your reinvention. The gap is evidence that your reinvention is real. But here is the part that makes this hard. The resistance does not always announce itself as resistance. It almost never says, "I am uncomfortable with who you are becoming and I would prefer you stop." It says other things. It says you're being naive. It says you have responsibilities. It says remember what happened last time. Remember when you tried that other thing. Remember you are not the kind of person who does this. It borrows your own history and turns it into a ceiling. Jordan figured this out on a Tuesday night, writing in a notebook he had started keeping during his transition. He wrote a single line. He later described it as the thing that changed how he moved through every difficult conversation after that. He wrote, "They are not arguing against my plan. They are arguing for the version of me they feel safe with." That single reframe gave him something to hold on to when the resistance showed up again, and it will show up again. For you too. If your reinvention is real, if you are actually becoming someone different, not just talking about it, the people around you will feel it before they can name it. They will push back before they know they are doing it. A little later, we will reach an idea about the role of relationships in financial change that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it starts changing every conversation you have about money with the people you are close to. But right now, there is something practical you need. Knowing the mechanism is not enough. You are going to have real conversations with real people who love you and are actively, unconsciously, pulling against what you are building. You need a way to speak into that without burning the relationship, without abandoning your plan, and without performing a version of yourself you have already outgrown. Jordan found his way through this. Not perfectly, not without loss. One friendship did not survive the transition, and he accepted that with more grace than he expected. But the relationships that mattered most, he kept. He kept them by doing three things consistently. The first was to stop seeking permission. Not to become cold or secretive, but to stop presenting his decisions as questions when they were not actually questions. He noticed that every time he framed a decision as, "I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think?" he was handing the other person a lever they did not need to have. He started presenting progress instead. "I landed a new client this month." Not asking, sharing. The conversation that follows sharing is different from the conversation that follows asking. The second thing Jordan did was name the love before he named the distance. When a family member pushed back hard, he learned to say something like this: "I know you are saying this because you don't want me to get hurt. I hear that. And I need you to know that I have thought about this more carefully than it might look from the outside. I'm not asking you to be certain about this. I'm just asking you to trust that I am." That sentence did something in conversations that logic alone could not do. It gave the other person an exit from the argument without requiring them to agree. The third thing was to build a parallel support structure. Jordan found two people, not from his existing circle, who were in the middle of their own reinventions. He spoke to them regularly, not to replace the people he loved, but to stop asking those people to carry the weight of a journey they had not chosen. You cannot keep drawing from a well that does not have what you need. You will empty it and resent it. Find the people who are in the middle of their own change. Let that be the place where you process the hardest parts. The people who love you are not your obstacle. They are your anchor. And there are moments when anchors save you, and moments when they hold you to the bottom. Knowing which moment you are in is the skill. Jordan built his new career. By 35, his income had crossed a number he had not let himself write down 3 years earlier because it seemed presumptuous. His family came around slowly, incompletely, but enough. And the thing that shifted them was not argument. It was evidence, delivered over time without apology. You do not need their permission before you start. You only need your own. So here is the question to carry into the chapter ahead. If the people around you are unconsciously voting for the version of you they already know, what does it mean that you have already started becoming someone they do not recognize yet? Chapter 9. The person at 35 is already in you. There is a moment that appears in the life of almost every person who has ever changed the direction of their own story. It does not arrive with fanfare. It does not feel like an arrival at all. It feels, at first, like a strange quiet, a stillness between what you used to believe about yourself and what you are only beginning to suspect might also be true. Across every era and culture, in the private notebooks and spoken confessions of people who rebuilt themselves from the middle of their lives, this moment is described the same way. A recognition, not of something new, but of something that was already present, waiting beneath the noise of old assumptions. You are standing in that moment right now. The question the previous chapter left you with, about becoming someone the people around you do not recognize yet, that question is not rhetorical. It is a signal. It means the process has already begun. And what this chapter is going to do is show you exactly where to find the evidence. Here is the open loop that will thread through everything that follows. Most people looking for their future self search in the wrong direction. They look forward, straining towards some imagined version of who they might become. But the person you are trying to reach is not ahead of you. Keep that idea close. We will return to it. Return to the shape of your life in that chapter from 3 years ago without polishing the memory, not just financially. Think about the way you talked about yourself in your own mind. The automatic sentences you used to end conversations with yourself. The ones that started with, "I'm not the kind of person who," or "that's not really for people like me." Think about how solid those sentences felt. How obvious. Think about how much of your daily behavior was quietly organized around making sure those sentences stayed true. 3 years ago, you were living inside a story about yourself that you did not write and never consciously agreed to. Most people never notice this. You are noticing it now. That noticing is not nothing. Priya noticed it at 31. She was still working the administrative job she had taken as a temporary measure at 26, still sharing a 2-bedroom apartment, still telling people she was figuring things out while privately suspecting that she had missed the window for any real figuring. The specific cost for Priya was not the money, though the money mattered. The cost was the daily performance of smallness. Every morning she would pass a particular coffee shop near her building, the kind with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus, and she would imagine running something like it someday. Then she would dismiss the thought before it finished forming. That dismissal was not humility. It was a practiced, automatic shrinking. One Thursday evening, someone from a workshop she had attended asked her what she would be doing if she had started at 22 with clear direction. Priya started to give her usual answer. Then she stopped. Instead of the usual answer, she listed, out loud, 4 concrete things she had already done in the previous 18 months, skills she had built quietly, a small side income she had grown from nothing, a relationship with a mentor she had sought out and maintained through consistent follow-through. She had been treating these as footnotes. Her interviewer treated them as the story. Priya went home that night and did not sleep immediately. She sat in her kitchen and looked at what she had actually done, not what she wished she had done, and saw a different person than the one she had been describing to herself every morning. That is the gap. Not between who you are and who you want to be. The gap is between who you actually are and who you believe yourself to be. Jordan's version of this came later and harder. By 33, he had lost 2 years to a business that failed and a relationship that ended in the same 6-month stretch. The version of Jordan that survived that period was leaner in ways that had nothing to do with money. He had stopped explaining himself to people who had not asked. He had stopped waiting for external validation before making small decisions. He had developed, without naming it, an entirely different relationship with discomfort. He walked toward it now out of habit, because he had learned that walking away from it always cost more. What Jordan did not see, until someone held up a mirror, was that these qualities, the ones he had earned through failure, were the precise qualities that his 35-year-old self would need. He had been treating his losses as a ledger of damage. They were actually a ledger of education. The 35-year-old Jordan was not going to be built from scratch. He was being assembled from exactly what the hard years had deposited. The false constraint most people carry into this moment sounds like this: I have to become a different person before I can do what I want to do. It is stated sometimes as a readiness problem. I will start when I am more prepared. Sometimes as a credential problem. I will move when I have the right title or income or approval. But underneath all of those statements is the same belief, that the self you need does not yet exist and must be constructed from the outside in, through achievement, through other people's recognition, through time served. That belief is the constraint, not the reality. The reality is that identity does not follow achievement. It precedes it. The behavior patterns that will define your life at 35 are already visible in what you do today when no one is measuring, in what you choose when both options are uncomfortable, in how you respond in the 10 minutes after a real setback. Those patterns are not potential. They are data. They are the first real data you have ever had about who you are as an adult, operating without the scaffolding of a school system or a parent's expectation, or a relationship that was never quite honest about how it was shaping you. This is what you are actually looking at when you look at your 30s honestly. You are looking at yourself without scaffolding for the first time. That is terrifying for about 2 reasons. First, it means you cannot blame the scaffolding anymore. Second, it means you have to see what is actually there. But here is what is actually there if you look without flinching. Evidence of persistence because you are still here, still asking these questions, still moving. Evidence of discernment because you know now what does not work for you, with a specificity you could not have had at 23. Evidence of capacity because you have carried things that were genuinely heavy and you did not drop them. Those 3 things are not character traits to develop. They are already yours. Now close the loop. Most people searching for their future self look forward. They construct images of a person they have not yet become, and then feel the distance between here and there as evidence of failure. But the person you are trying to reach is not ahead of you. The 35-year-old version of you is already present in every decision you make that the old story would have prevented. Every time you do the thing the constrained version of you would have skipped, you are not moving toward that person. You are being that person. The gap closes not by covering distance, but by removing the false walls that made the distance appear. The 35-year-old version is not built from zero. It is the current version with the false constraints removed. And here is the question that the final chapter will answer. When the window you were afraid was closing turns out to have always been a door, what is the first thing you walk toward? Chapter 10. The window was a door the whole time. You have made it this far. And something in you already knows this chapter is different. Not because the words will be different, because you are different. You picked up this book carrying a particular weight. The feeling that time had moved without you, that the life you were supposed to be living had already chosen someone else. You read every chapter with that feeling somewhere nearby, a low hum beneath everything. Here is what I want to ask you directly without softening it. What if that feeling was never a warning? What if it was a compass, pointing not backward at what you missed, but forward at what you were finally ready to see? You have been treating the ache in your chest like evidence of failure. It was actually evidence of awareness. Those are not the same thing. One closes doors, the other opens them. You are about to find out which one was true the whole time. An unresolved question is carrying this chapter forward from the first minute. Back in the very first pages of this book, there was a window. You remember it. The one you were certain was shutting. You pressed your hands against it in your mind, counted all the years that had passed, named all the people who seemed further ahead. And you concluded, reasonably, understandably, wrongly, that the best light had already moved on without you. Hold that image for just a moment longer before I turn it over. Think about who you were at 22, not the romantic version of that person, the real one. The one who made decisions with almost no information, who chose a direction mostly because someone else had already laid the path, who said yes to things because saying no felt like arrogance, who said no to things because saying yes felt like risk. That person was moving fast, and that person was largely guessing. Now think about who you are right now. You have lived through at least one version of the life you thought you wanted. You know what it feels like from the inside. You have lost something and rebuilt something and noticed the difference. You have met enough people to recognize which ones cost you and which ones compound you. You have been afraid and kept going. You have stopped and started again. This is not the biography of someone behind. This is the biography of someone who finally has real data. That is the thing nobody tells you at 22. You are operating on assumptions, guessing at what security feels like, guessing at what a good relationship costs you versus gives you, guessing at what work will hold your attention for more than 3 years. By 30, those guesses have been tested. Some of them held, a lot of them did not. And that wreckage, the plans that didn't survive, the identity that needed shedding, every detour you named as a failure, all of it was not time lost. It was data collected. What felt like a closing window was the first moment you had enough real information to open the right door. Let that land without rushing past it. Because here is what the linear life timeline myth never accounts for. It measures progress by sequence: school, then job, then promotion, then house, then stability, then comfort. Then you look back and call it a life. That sequence rewards early compliance. It punishes anyone who pauses, questions, gets knocked down, or wakes up at 30 and realizes they have been optimizing for someone else's definition of arrival. The myth calls that failure. What it actually is the beginning of something accurate. There was a woman named Rosa who spent her 20s doing everything right by the timeline. Degree, career track, savings account, engagement by 28. She reached 31 with a life that looked correct from the outside and felt hollow from the inside. She told a friend once that she felt like she had been running a race in the wrong direction and had just noticed. She could either keep running and pretend she had not seen it, or she could stop. She stopped. She spent 14 months doing nothing that looked like progress to anyone watching. She moved to a smaller apartment. She worked a job beneath her education. She read. She sat with the discomfort of not optimizing. At 33, something clarified, not dramatically, quietly. She knew what she was actually good at, what she was willing to sacrifice for, and what she would no longer trade her attention for. By 35, she had built the first version of something real, not something that looked real, something that felt built from the right materials. Rosa did not succeed despite the pause. She succeeded because she took it seriously enough to learn from it. Now here is your mirror moment, not a prompt to grab a pen, just a question to sit with quietly wherever you are listening. Where were you 5 years ago in terms of what you believed about yourself? What story were you telling about your own limits, your own potential, your own timeline? Are you still telling that story now, even quietly, even under new words? Sometimes the identity we carry is so familiar we stop noticing we are wearing it. And the only way to change what you build is to change who you believe is building it. You are not the person who missed the window. You are the person who just recognized the door. The 5-year window you have been hearing about throughout this book is not a second chance. Second chances imply you failed the first time. What you have now is a first chance with real information. That is rarer than it sounds. Most people never get it because they never stop long enough to let the data of their own life speak to them. They move from one version of compliance to the next, faster and faster, and call that momentum. You slowed down. You questioned. You felt the weight of it. And now you are here at the beginning of the only compounding era that counts. The one where the identity doing the compounding is actually yours. Identity before strategy. You heard that early in this book. Here is what it means at the end of it. Strategy is borrowed. Identity is built. You can take any strategy from any successful person, apply it to a borrowed identity, and it will produce borrowed results. Results that feel like someone else's life even when they arrive. But when the identity is accurate, when you know who you are doing the work for and why and what it actually means to you, the strategy becomes almost secondary. The right moves become obvious. The right people become visible. The right doors stop looking like windows. Here is how you close the loop. That window you were afraid of in the beginning, the one with all the fear pressed against it, the one that felt like evidence of your lateness in arriving at your own life. It was never a window. A window is something you look through but cannot enter. A door is something you choose to walk through when you are ready. You were not late, you were not early. You were standing in front of a door that required a specific kind of readiness to open. And that readiness required every year you lived, including the ones you are ashamed of. You are ready now. Before this chapter ends, before this book releases you back into your life, there is one thing left to do, not a plan, not a list. One sentence, your sentence. Spoken aloud in your own voice into the actual air of wherever you are. Here it is. I am not starting over. I am starting finally from the truth. Say it again if you need to. Say it until it stops feeling borrowed and starts feeling accurate. Say it until the person speaking it is you, because the door was always there. You just arrived.